It's 11 p.m. and you're deep into a tutorial for something that has absolutely nothing to do with your job. Last month it was graphic design. Before that, chess strategy. Before that, philosophy, astronomy, a second language you may never speak fluently. You have 6 half-finished projects, a browser with 17 open tabs from 6 completely different worlds, and one question that keeps circling back to you, quiet and persistent. Why can't I just pick one thing? Everyone around you seems to have a lane. They introduce themselves with a single word. I'm a doctor, I'm an engineer, I'm a developer. And when someone asks you what you do, you freeze. Because the honest answer is a paragraph. Most people look at you and see someone scattered. A jack of all trades, master of none. They tell you to specialize, to stop starting things, to finally commit to one direction before it's too late. But the truth is the exact opposite of everything they've been telling you. That restless curiosity you keep apologizing for is not a lack of discipline. According to the psychology of polymaths, it is one of the most reliable patterns found in the people who reach the very top of their fields across human history. Your multiple interests are not the reason you feel behind. Used correctly, they are an unfair advantage that almost no one teaches you how to use. And by the end of this video, you're going to understand exactly what that advantage is, how it works inside your mind, and how to stop scattering it and start compounding it. Let's start with the real name for this pattern, because what you're experiencing is not a flaw with a quirky nickname. It is a documented psychological profile with serious evidence behind it. Psychology calls it polymathy, the genuine pursuit of multiple fields across a lifetime. And the most powerful evidence for what it produces comes from an unexpected place: the biographies of Nobel Prize winners. Researchers Robert and Michele Root-Bernstein spent years studying the lives of laureates across science, literature, economics, and peace. They compared them to ordinary members of the same professions, colleagues with the same qualifications, similar publications, similar careers. And what they found should have made global headlines. Nobel laureates were dramatically more likely than their less celebrated colleagues to have serious interests outside their primary field. They painted. They played instruments. They wrote poetry. They built things with their hands, studied subjects that had nothing to do with their prize-winning work. The average laureate maintained genuine engagement in more than 2 separate areas of knowledge and practice. And here is the part that matters most. Many of them said this was not an accident. They described their outside interests as a deliberate strategy, the fuel for their best ideas, the source of the breakthroughs that defined their careers. The people at the absolute peak of human achievement were not the most narrow. They were the most broad. So how does this actually work inside the mind? Why would learning music make you a better scientist? Why would studying philosophy make you sharper in business? Why would a skill from one world quietly improve something in a completely different one? The mechanism has a name. It's called transfer. Your brain does not store what you learn in sealed, separate boxes. Every field you enter teaches you more than facts. It teaches you patterns, structures, the shape of how a certain kind of problem behaves. And when you carry a pattern from one world into another, you can suddenly see a solution that the people who live inside that world cannot see. Because to them it looks entirely new, and to you it looks familiar. A musician who studies programming sees recursion differently than a pure programmer. A writer who studies biology describes systems differently than a pure writer. Someone who has learned both negotiation and design sees a client pitch differently than someone trained in only one. You didn't just learn 2 things, you learned a language that lets the 2 things talk to each other. Meanwhile, something very different is happening in the mind of the pure specialist. Researcher Eric Dane described it with a term worth remembering: cognitive entrenchment. The deeper someone goes into a single domain, the more stable and rigid their mental map of that domain becomes. That stability makes them fast and effective within the map, but it also makes them brittle. They stop questioning the map itself. They start rejecting anything that doesn't fit inside it. Their expertise slowly and quietly hardens into a cage. Think of it like farming. A field planted with a single crop is efficient right up until one disease arrives that the crop has no resistance to. Then the whole field collapses in a single season. A forest is messier, slower, harder to explain to someone who wants clean rows. But a forest survives almost everything because nothing can eliminate that much variety at once. The specialist is the single crop. You are the forest. But maybe you're thinking, if breadth is so powerful, why does my path feel so slow? Why do I look at people who picked a lane at 22 and feel like I'm years behind them? Here, the research has something almost comforting to say. In 2022, scientists Brooke McNamara, David Hambrick, and their colleagues published a massive analysis of more than 6,000 athletes, including hundreds of the highest performing competitors in the world. The finding challenged decades of conventional wisdom. The world-class athletes were usually not the ones who specialized early, they were the ones who sampled. They played multiple sports, started their primary sport later than their peers, and this is the part that stays with you. They progressed more slowly at the beginning than athletes who peaked at the regional or national level and stopped there. The same researchers found an identical pattern in science. Nobel laureates had broader training and slower early progress than colleagues who won smaller awards and plateaued sooner. Slow early progress was not the mark of the people who failed. It was the signature of the people playing the longest game. So if your 20s or 30s feel like a series of restarts and redirections and half-completed explorations, you may not be falling behind at all. You may simply be in your sampling period, the exact phase the greatest performers went through before anyone knew their names. You are not late. You are loading. Now let's get specific about what you're actually carrying. Because it's time to stop experiencing your breadth as a vague, unverifiable advantage and start understanding the three precise edges it gives you. Advantage 1. You can import ideas. Picture a meeting where a team has been stuck on the same problem for 3 weeks. Everyone in the room has the same training, the same professional background, the same mental map of the territory, which means they are all searching the same small plot of ground. Then someone makes a connection to something from a completely different world, a principle from biology, a technique from game design, a structure borrowed from storytelling, and the room goes quiet because it works. That move has a name in psychology, far transfer, carrying a solution across the border between two unrelated domains. Specialists cannot make that move, not because they aren't intelligent, but because you cannot import from a country you have never visited. Every interest you have ever pursued is a border you have crossed. Every field you have explored, even incompletely, is a territory your mind can now draw from. Your so-called scattered past is actually a network of trade routes, and ideas are the cargo. Advantage 2. You are immune to the expert's disease. Remember cognitive entrenchment? The way deep expertise slowly hardens into rigidity? Now think about what happens when a field changes, and every field eventually changes. Technology shifts the rules. New research overturns the old assumptions. The map that took a specialist 20 years to build becomes wrong in 20 months. For the specialist, this is not an inconvenience. It is an identity crisis. Their entire sense of professional self was rooted in that single territory. Losing the map means losing themselves. But you have lived through this kind of shift many times. On a smaller scale, every time you entered a new field as a complete beginner. You know what it feels like to not know. You know the discomfort of the first clumsy weeks, and you know from experience that it passes. You have a practiced tolerance for uncertainty that the specialist never built because they never had to. Dane's research pointed to exactly this. Exposure to tasks and domains outside your primary field is one of the most reliable ways cognitive entrenchment gets interrupted. What feels like restlessness from the outside is actually a repeated workout, and the muscle it builds is adaptability, the single most valuable trait in a world that refuses to stay still. Advantage 3. You can own an intersection. Here is the math that nobody explains to you clearly. Becoming the best in the world at one specific thing is nearly impossible. Millions of people are competing for that position, and many of them started earlier than you, have more resources than you, and have narrowed their entire life around that single goal. But becoming genuinely capable at 2 or 3 things, and then combining them in a way that no one else has, puts you in a category with almost no competition. Because almost no one has your exact combination. A solid writer who understands psychology and knows how video editing works can build something that a world-class writer with no other skills simply cannot. A competent programmer who also understands design and can speak clearly to a room becomes more valuable than a brilliant programmer who can do neither. A business person who genuinely understands human behavior sees opportunities that a business person without that lens will walk past every single day. You don't have to win the crowded race. You can step sideways into a race with one entrant, you, and collect the prize. Specialists compete on depth, where the line behind them is endless. You compete on combination, where you might be the only person standing. But every advantage has a bill. And it's time to be honest about yours. The price of breadth is that the world cannot read you easily. Society runs on labels, and you don't fit cleanly on a badge. In job interviews, at dinners, on professional profiles, you watch people's faces flicker with slight confusion when your answer to "what do you do" requires more than one sentence. And the deeper cut is internal. Because you can compare yourself against a specialist in each of your fields, you always have someone to lose to. The full-time photographer produces cleaner work than you. The full-time developer ships faster than you. So you privately conclude that you are mediocre at everything, while completely failing to notice the one scoreboard where you win, the combination, because no one ever built a scoreboard for it. That is the paradox. The very breadth that makes you rare is what makes you invisible in conventional comparison. You spent years building an advantage and then let people who don't have it convince you it's a weakness. So, what is the way out? How do you turn scattered interests into a real compounding edge? The answer is not to amputate your curiosity, not to force yourself into a single lane and stay there by willpower. That approach fails for the polymath the way a cage fails a bird built to migrate. You cannot willpower yourself into being narrow, and the research suggests you shouldn't want to. But breadth alone is not the advantage. Breadth plus three principles is: Principle 1. Finish things. This is where a difficult distinction needs to be made. There is a counterfeit version of the polymath, and it's worth knowing which one you are right now. The counterfeit is the collector. The collector begins everything and completes nothing. Watches the tutorials, buys the equipment, reads the first 3 chapters, feels the initial excitement, and then quietly disappears when the beginner's rush wears off and the real unglamorous work begins. If that is the entire pattern, let's not decorate it. That is not polymathy. That is consumption wearing a costume. And no accumulation of new interests will fix the fact that none of them have ever been carried to the point of producing something real. The Nobel laureates were not tourists in their outside fields. They were serious amateurs who performed, exhibited, published, and built. They crossed the line between learning and making. So here is the dividing line. In each field you enter, stay long enough to make something real. A finished project, a performance, a thing that exists outside your head and could be seen, heard, or used by someone else. You don't need mastery in everything, you need proof in everything. The proof is what separates the polymath from the collector. Principle 2. Build the bridges on purpose. Your edge is not the individual interests themselves, it's the connections between them. But those connections don't always form on their own because the mind tends to keep different contexts in separate compartments. So force the intersection deliberately. When you learn something new in one field, pause and ask one specific question. Where else does this apply? Take the principle you learned in music and carry it into your writing. Take the structure you learned in sport and apply it to your work process. Take the insight from philosophy and test it against your business decisions. Keep the borders between your worlds open on purpose. A network of trade routes is worthless if no cargo ever moves between them. The collector has many interests. The polymath has many interests that actively talk to each other. Principle 3. Go deep in seasons. Breadth does not mean doing everything simultaneously. Spread across 5 pursuits in the same week and every one of them will starve. And so will you. The pattern in the research is not simultaneous chaos, it is rotation with depth. The highest performers sampled widely across their development, then invested deeply. one commitment at a time for sustained stretches. Give each interest a season, a period of months where it receives your primary focus while the others rest in the background, available but not competing. Depth is how a single field pays you. Rotation is how the combination pays you. You need both, just not on the same day at the same time. And when you begin to live this way, something quietly changes. The trait doesn't disappear, it matures. The scattered version of you was a field of random seedlings, promising, potentially remarkable, but fragile and disconnected. The integrated version is that forest, layered, connected, able to survive the storms that collapse single crop mines. You stop experiencing your many interests as a swarm of distractions pulling you in 5 directions at once. You start experiencing them as one system that feeds itself. The photography informs how you see stories. The psychology informs how you understand people. The coding informs how you think about systems. Everything starts to compound. And the question that used to follow you everywhere, what do I actually do, slowly loses its grip. Because you were never supposed to be a job title. You were supposed to be a combination, a particular and unrepeatable set of lenses stacked together, through which the world looks different than it does to anyone else alive. Maybe that is the larger truth hiding inside all of this. We were told our entire lives that greatness means narrowing, that a serious person picks one door and closes every other one. That focus is a single fixed point, and anything beyond it is a distraction you should be ashamed of. But when researchers actually opened the biographies of the most creative, most impactful, most generative people who ever lived, they did not find narrow specialists who heroically resisted the temptation of other interests. They found minds that refused to close doors and won because of it, not in spite of it. The world will keep asking you to shrink into a label, to make yourself easier to describe, easier to categorize, easier for other people to place. You are allowed to decline. So, out of the 3 unfair advantages, importing ideas, immunity to entrenchment, or owning your intersection, which one do you recognize most clearly in yourself? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one. And I promise you're not the only one down there with 6 open tabs, an unfinished project on the desk, and a list where most people have a title. If this video reframed something for you, hit like and share it with that one person in your life who keeps apologizing for having too many interests. The one who was told to just pick something already. The one who needed someone to explain that they were never scattered. They were just early. Subscribe so we can keep decoding the hidden patterns in the mind that nobody else is talking about. I'll see you in the next one.